The Pro-Life Perspective, and I'm Abigail Lorenzen, your host. This is the podcast of Right to Life of Northeast Indiana. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we have with us Sean Corcoran. He is the executive director of Men for Life, which is a group that we don't hear a whole lot about, and we need to. I'm really glad they exist. So I'm excited to have Sean on and talking with us about that. Hey, Sean, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to hear about what Men for Life is doing. And I'm actually really interested in hearing your story. It'll be, I think, really interesting to hear your perspective on this kind of thing and your firsthand experience, unfortunately, that you have. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Sean, because I don't know how much you want to weave things into your story.
Okay.
I don't want to give anything away. So go ahead and take the mic and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you. So my name is Sean Corcoran. I'm an attorney. I live in Louisiana. I am married to Dr. Michelle Corcoran, who is a dentist, and we have 5 children. We have 2 biological children and 3 adopted children. And I'm currently, as you said, I'm the CEO of Men for Life. I've been doing this since August of 2024. So not quite 2 years yet. And prior to that, I was practicing law. And I guess to your question of the real question is, how did I get involved in this, right? Like, how did you go from practicing law to running a pro-life nonprofit, which definitely was not on my radar.
It usually isn't on people's radar.
Yeah. I actually said no for 2 years before God very, very, I don't know if it's forcefully, lovingly, but he shoved me into the door and said, "This is what you're going to do, buddy." And so, I'm very thankful for that. I, like many men in the pro-life movement, I think many women in the pro-life movement as well. I lost a child to abortion. I was 19 years old and I was away at college, and I was sitting in my dorm room, and the girl that I was dating at the time came in and she told me that she was pregnant. And, in my mind as a 19-year-old man, I knew what pregnancy was, right? There's a baby coming. And so that's the stuff that I started working through is, there's a baby coming. How is this going to change my life? How is this going to change your life? How is this going to change our lives?
Yeah.
What does this mean? We're starting our 2nd semester of college. And so how is this going to impact us? And as I'm talking through all of this, she stopped me and she said, "Well, I'm not going to have the baby. I'm going to have an abortion." And keep in mind, this is 1997, right? So this is before the internet was the way that I normally explain it. Is the internet was somewhere that you went to download music very slowly. It wasn't like it is today. There was no social media. There was no shouting your abortion. There was no, it was something that people did in secret, in the shadows and didn't really talk about. I knew what abortion was, but I didn't know that it was something that people did. I didn't know anyone that had ever had an abortion. Yeah. And so when she told me that she was going to have an abortion, the best that I could do was to say, no, no, not going to have an abortion. There's a baby. And, and that didn't work. It didn't matter how many times I said no. It was made very clear to me that what I thought, what I said, what I felt didn't matter. And so I lost that fight. And when I lost that fight, what really happened was, I became completely unable to protect my child. And that is something that as men, especially, we have this built in, we were created by God to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to do it all in a way that leaves a legacy that honors God. Mm-hmm. And so to remove the ability to protect my child from death was incredibly emasculating, and it broke me. And so I started struggling in school. And I started struggling in school. She started struggling in school because regardless of what the abortion industry wants you to believe, abortion negatively impacts women. Mm-hmm. And so she started struggling in school. And she told me, "Hey, I went and talked to the counselor, and the counselor said, they're going to help me waive some classes so that my grades aren't impacted so that I can continue." And so I went the very next day. I spoke to the very same counselor. I told the very same story. This is the person you talked to yesterday. This is the situation that is happening or that has happened. This is the impact that it has had. This is the resolution you came up with for her. And I'm the other part of that. And the counselor just said no. This doesn't affect you. I don't see how this affects you. You're a man. And so that's what I was left with. I was left with the mom telling me that it didn't matter what I did or what I felt or what I said. The school counselor who as a 19-year-old boy, right? The school counselor is an authority figure telling me
was that a man or a woman?
It was a woman. Just
out of curiosity. Okay.
Telling me that it didn't, that's the first time anybody's ever asked that question. And I think it's a great question. Telling me, the school counselor telling me that, this doesn't affect me because I'm a man. And so that's what I'm left with. And it did affect me, and I went back to my dorm room and I sat there for the rest of the semester and I failed out of college. And then I moved home and I failed out of another college 2 more times. And then I just began doing, anything and everything that I could to change the way that I felt inside.
Yeah.
I was told the abortion didn't affect me, so I didn't know what it was that was making me feel the way that I felt, but I hated myself and needed to do whatever I could to change how I felt. And so that resulted in a lot of destructive behaviors, a lot of drinking, partying, using women, drugs. And 8 years after the abortion, I was at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, overdosing in a hotel room and waiting for the police to come and arrest me.
Now, hang on a second, Sean. I'm going to pause you here in your role because, rewind, and you had a very solid stance against abortion, which is not something that we always see in men's abortion stories. A lot of times we see a sort of apathy, like, oh, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But you had a really solid stance against it. Where did that come from?
Well, I think that there was never a question in my mind that, when a baby is coming, you raise the baby. Like, it wasn't.
Is that from your family? Is that just?
I mean, it could be from my family. It could be from my education. It could be, I don't know, because it's just how I was raised, right? Like there wasn't that there was a conversation. We never in my family talked about abortion. I went to Catholic school, so I'm certain that at some point along the line, abortion was a topic of conversation, but it wasn't something that they really spent a lot of time on, and they don't spend a lot of time on it in Catholic schools now. And so, it just was like, you just don't kill babies.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
It just didn't make sense to me. It was like, you don't walk in front of a train. Like,
right.
I never had conversations with my family about, why you should never walk in front of a train. You just don't do it.
Right. It just was.
So,
okay.
So I don't have a really good answer for that. Like,
no, that's okay. It's interesting
it was just a normal thing to me that you just don't kill babies. And so, and it's still a normal thing to me that you don't kill babies. It's bewildering to me to have this conversation, not with you, but with people on the other side, every single day, and it's getting harder to understand that people think that it's okay to kill babies. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's what it was to me, right? It was that she killed my baby, our baby.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what it was to her too. That's why it affected her in a negative way. And that's why she had to get classes waived. So that was the impact, right? It just destroyed me. And not knowing how to live with that, I continued to destroy me. And, thank God, he pulled me out of that hotel room, and I was able to get into treatment the next day. And in treatment is where a counselor said, hey, we should talk about this abortion, and kind of gave me permission to mourn the loss of my child, to talk about the regret and the guilt and the shame, and to really feel that and to begin to heal. And she helped me to name my child. I named him Michael. To write letters asking for forgiveness, to write letters forgiving the mother of my child and my younger self, and really to begin to heal. And, the thing that she didn't tell me, though, was that I was not the only man who ever felt this way.
Yeah.
And so, and again, this is, I mean, we have social media now, and there's still not men talking about it. So imagine back then when none of that existed, like there wasn't men talking about this. There wasn't even women talking about it then.
Right.
And so I believed that I was the only man that had ever dealt with this. And I was grateful for the opportunity to begin to heal and to be able to be told that it's okay, to feel this way. But there was not like any other person for me to talk to about it. And so I just kind of went on with my life. I continued recovery from drugs and alcohol, and I went back to college. I went to law school, and I married Michelle, who I had been pursuing for 7 years. And for 7 years, she said yes about 12 times and canceled on me at the last minute 12 times until, and God was protecting everything we have today from who I was at that time, even when I was in recovery, because I wasn't whole yet, protecting everything we have today from who I was at that time while he was building me into the man that she deserved. And so, I'm so grateful for that. And now we just have this amazing family and this amazing life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And so we got married, and I started my own law firm. And shortly after that, I went on a retreat. And on this retreat, all these men were sharing all these stories that just the most vulnerable things they could possibly share.
What retreat was it?
It was an ACTS retreat.
Okay.
Through the church. And so all these men are sharing all these stories. And I noticed that they were being met not with judgment, but with grace. And so, God just put it on my heart that, hey, you can literally unload everything here and it's safe. And so that's what I did. And it was very healing. But what was more important than that was the recognition after I shared that it had nothing to do with me, because I had 3 different men come up to me after that in private and say, I haven't told anybody this in 20 years.
Yeah.
Or I haven't told anybody this in 30 years. But I lost my first child to abortion when I was 19, when I was 20. And this happens every time that I speak. And that men come up and say, I have never told anyone this. Because men aren't talking about it because men aren't talking about it, right?
Right.
And once someone says something, just like on that retreat, where all these men sharing these hard stories of their lives opened up the ability for me to be vulnerable. By me sharing my story to others, they hear that, and that opens the door for them to trust me, right? To say, hey, I can tell him this because he knows what this is like. And I didn't realize that I wasn't the only one. And so the recognition there that God wanted me to share, not because of me, but to open the door for other men to know that they're not alone, right? And to be able to share. And so I started sharing my story after that in small places, local Marches for Life. I was on the board of a pregnancy center here. And so Men for Life must have heard me share. Because we ended up doing a project together in 2020 or 2021.
So Men for Life already existed.
That's correct.
Okay. How old is that group?
Started in 2018.
Okay.
And so then in 2022, when I stepped back from practicing law, I with 5 little kids, I just recognized that I was very good at practicing law, and I was very bad at being a lawyer and being a present husband and being a present father. And those things were more important to me. And so I stopped practicing. And shortly after I stopped practicing, Men for Life started asking me if I would come and run the organization. And like I said earlier, I said, absolutely not. There's no way I'm going to run a pro-life nonprofit. Like I had it on my mind, right? Like I was going to find a way to make as much money as I was making practicing law, but have more freedom to be able to be home with my family. And so that was my goal. And that's not, it's not what running a pro-life nonprofit means. And so I said no for about 18 months, and worked on business plans and was ready to roll out a new business in the summer of 24. And I was on an airplane on the way to meet the consultant that I'd been working with for 8 months. And on that airplane, God said, you're going to go run this nonprofit. And it was just a super clear message. Like it wasn't a question, it was a command. And it wasn't like there was no question about what it was that the message was telling me. And so I hadn't talked to them in 4 months. I didn't even know if they were still looking.
Mm-hmm.
But I walked into this meeting and I set down all the papers that I'd been working on. And I said, I'm ready to roll out this business. But listen to what just happened. And the truth is that I wanted him to say, this is a horrible idea.
Yeah.
So that I could turn around and blame him for not listening to God. And he said, yeah, right. Like that's what we do. I mean, you go all the way back to the garden and Adam,
right.
you know, and blaming anyone he could other than himself. But he didn't say that. He said, I think this is a great idea and I will help you to grow this organization for the money you've already paid me. And
wow.
So I got back on the airplane and I emailed them and I said, hey, I don't know if you guys are even still looking, but if you are, I'm interested. And we worked through a couple of details. And in August of 2024, I took over the role as CEO of Men for Life.
That's incredible. I love when these stories have that piece in it where like God is so clearly laying a path for people and you don't always get to see it in people's stories, that path or, you know, that hand, that guidance. And then sometimes you do. And it's so fun to hear people share that when you can see so clearly the hand of God in a pathway. It's neat. So what is Men for Life? You know, I work for Right to Life. I know what we do inside the pro-life movement, but what does Men for Life do inside the pro-life movement? I'm going to guess there's some overlap between us, but.
Yeah. So, you know, well, the Right to Life organizations, you know, from what I understand from the majority of them, the major goal is to change the culture. Mm-hmm. You know, we're going to end abortion by changing the culture. And of course, there's policy stuff on y'all's end a lot of time that I don't deal with policy. But our mission is to change the culture by restoring authentic masculinity, equipping men to speak boldly and stand confidently for life, family, and faith. You know, our vision is a world where abortion is unthinkable because men have stepped back into the arena mm-hmm. to fight for life. Mm-hmm. And so what we do, you know, it's really interesting how we got to this point because, you know, when Men for Life was started, the young man who started it, once he got out of school, because he started it when he was 15.
Oh, wow.
Once he got out of school, he went to work for Louisiana Right to Life, which made it difficult for him to grow Men for Life because the donor base is the same, right? Like everybody he's interacting with, he has an obligation to his employer.
Right.
So the projects they did, which were great, you know, through grants, were limited. In his time and ability to grow, were limited. And so it was almost as though I was given a blank slate, you know, and said, here you go, do what you can do with it. And so the first thing that I had was, you know, we're going to start a podcast and we're going to just start putting out content of men sharing stories about how abortion has impacted them.
Yes.
As you can imagine, me being someone who is very vocal about this, I was a little overzealous in what I believed would be the ability to get men to share
to talk about
on
it.
YouTube, their stories of their loss of fatherhood to abortion. Yeah. And so the podcast evolved to interviewing men and women who have been impacted by abortion survivors, people who have been conceived in rape, people who are leading in the pro-life movement. You know, it just really evolved into a pro-life podcast because at the end of the day, if I can normalize men through myself, talking about this to where men hear it and become comfortable talking about it, then we're doing something, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the low hanging fruit. And then I went to my first pro-life conference. It was Heartbeat International in the spring of 25. And all I had was a giant banner that said Men for Life and a table, you know, and a belief that God was going to give me some direction. And I had 104 different pregnancy centers come up to me at that conference and ask me the exact same 3 questions. And I mean, the traffic that I had was to the point where people were walking away because they couldn't get to the booth.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, I'm not selling anything. During breaks, people who had been exhibiting for years were coming up and saying, what do you do? Like, how do you have so much traffic?
Yeah, because your banner says Men for Life.
I have a sign. like that's it. I have a sign and I'm just having conversations. But the 3 questions they asked were, do you have a fatherhood program? I think this is really important because this is from pregnancy centers. And what we know is through numbers, through a study from the Vitae Foundation, that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's higher than any number that we have for women.
Mm-hmm.
97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's huge.
So the pregnancy centers, this is before this data was even out. The pregnancy centers knew that there was something there and they needed to be serving the fathers. And so they knew that they could tell the impact that the father seeing the ultrasound had.
Mm-hmm.
So they were already telling mom, bring dad. So they were already getting him to see the ultrasound. So then the problem they were having, and the second question they asked was, how do we get him to come back? Because they could get him in for the ultrasound because mom said, come.
Yeah.
But they couldn't get him to come back. And then the third question they had was, how do we get men in our community to facilitate this? Because we, the women of the pregnancy centers, recognize that we are not the right people to raise men to be men. Right.
Right.
And,
you can't have it run by a
we
woman.
can laugh about that because it's so common sense. But, you know, the fact that we're at this point in our society in America where that's a conversation that has to happen is because there's been a push from the other side for so long that you don't need men. Right. And that's one of the reasons that we're even here is this huge push through this third and second wave feminism that we don't even need men. And so, you know, for these women, I think it's amazing foresight for them to say, not only, hey, we recognize that if we can serve these men, we can save more babies, but also we need men to raise up these men, you know? And I think a lot of that comes from a biblical worldview and the ability to recognize that men and women were created not to compete, but to complement each other, you know? And as we raise men through masculinity, it allows women to embrace their biblical femininity, right? And so it's so important, and these women recognize that. And so by the 15th person asking if I had a fatherhood program, I just started saying yes. I was like, yes, that's what we're doing. Like we are in the process of developing a fatherhood program, and it was true. Like in my mind, I recognized this is where God's leading me.
Yeah.
And so this is what we are going to do.
As of 5 minutes ago, we are developing one.
Like I am currently in development of it as we're talking. Keep asking me questions so I know what to do.
Yeah.
And so so then I took the 3 questions and have been working on a fatherhood program based on those questions, right? How do we get them to come back? Well, you're not going to get a 19 or 20-year-old man to come back to change a diaper on a doll for a baby that's going to be here in 25 weeks with a woman that he may not even be in a relationship with. Like, that's not how you compete with the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you want him to come back, you have to give him something that he wants, right? And so that's the first thing. Like if we want that 97% and he's already seen the ultrasound, then the only goal of that initial meeting is to get him to come back to the first day. Like, that's it. It's without making it, you know, sleazeballish. It is a sale. Like, you're selling.
Yeah. I mean, you're competing for his priorities.
That's right. That's right. You know, and you've got to compete with what's comfortable, right? Because that's where we are in America today. Like, we're at a point of comfort, and what's comfortable to him, you're bringing him out of his comfort zone and into something else. You got to give him something that he really wants. You have to inspire him. And so, you know, the idea then that, how do we inspire this young man? Well, you know, we can always go back to the Bible, right? And look for the truth. And we can inspire this young man by pouring into him in that initial meeting, maybe for the first time that another man has ever poured into him, by listening to him, like really listening to his concerns, maybe for the first time that another man has ever really listened to his concerns. And by letting him know that he can be more than he's ever been told he can be.
Yeah.
He can live for something greater than himself. And we can show you how to do that, right? So that he's just pique his interest so that he will come back to learn what you have to offer. And then build upon that throughout each week of the fatherhood program. You know, and so that is our program is not based on, you know, how to change diapers, how to bottle feed, how to swaddle, you know, all these things that I always tell people. I look at my bookshelf where I have my copy of What to Expect When Expecting still sitting there, still unopened. And my oldest is 11 years old.
It's honestly not a great book. I don't love it.
Yeah. I'm glad I didn't waste my time because I learned
shut.
how to change diapers on a real baby in the hospital. Like,
Right.
and did I get it right every time? No. But like, did it destroy me that I got it wrong? No. Like, that's what we're trying to build a man who doesn't get flustered by little things going wrong. Right. And so our program is based on principles of biblical masculinity, on building the man into a good man, on teaching him about his roles to protect, to provide, to lead, and to serve, and not beating him over the head with the Bible, because I think that is a good way to lose people in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But explaining to him that what we're trying to build and what true masculinity is and what it means to be a man, we can find the truth in all that if we look for it.
Yeah.
And that this is where we can find it, mm-hmm. and to just keep going. It's not my goal through this program to convert everyone to Christianity, but it is my goal to help them to learn to be a man and to share with them where we get this.
Yeah.
And then they can make, it just like Jesus shares the truth and allows people to walk away.
Yeah.
Like we share the truth and then they can do with it what they want.
Yeah.
And, but the goal is to build a man who is ready to lead and ready to serve others so that we can change society.
I think that makes so much sense, Sean, in two ways that are popping up right now in my brain. The first one is that if you help men realize that part of their part of their role is that service piece, then they're interested in learning how to change a diaper because this is part of who I'm supposed to be.
Right.
Right. I have run into men, Sean, who have proudly told me, I've never changed a diaper in my life. And these guys have like 6 kids, grandkids, and they're telling me, oh yeah, I've never changed a diaper in my life. And I'm like, I'm not proud of you for that. Like, I feel a sense of abandonment on your wife's behalf. So
I would say,
I love the idea of like, build the character, build the foundation, and all the little things will follow.
Right.
Now, not that every person who's never changed a diaper is a terrible person, but like, come on, like moms need help in changing diapers. An easy way to do it. Why are you proud of not having done this?
Right. To that, I would say where your pride should come from, if we should have any pride at all, should be, here are all the things that I did to serve my wife while she was taking care of that. Right.
Yeah.
Like if we can agree that like I can't imagine, I get what you're saying. I can't imagine never having changed a diaper. Like I remember the first time that Michelle came with me to babysit my niece, and there was an explosion, and she almost died. She had never changed a diaper, and like she could not handle what was happening, on the kitchen floor, and so and to me, I like I had changed by that point tons of diapers, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So I get what you're saying. But I think the badge of courage should not come from, I've never changed a diaper. If that is your life situation, then where I would say the badge of honor should come from is, I did all these things for my family, for my wife, for my children. And I worked so hard at doing all of these things and was so diligent and so honoring of them in doing that she was able to do this.
Yeah.
To the point where I'm now realizing I never had to change a diaper. Not because I didn't want to, but because she took care of that while I took care of all of these things. Because I think that's much different than, I never changed a diaper, like, and I won't. Like that. That's just ridiculous. But but I think,
and off-putting.
I think that there's a lot that goes into that. I would think you'd want to change a diaper just to be able to say you know how to do it, if you're somebody that's willing to serve your family to that degree. But I don't know everybody's situations. So
you were raised Catholic, so I don't know how familiar you are with Luther and his writings, but he has some really great writings on vocation. And he actually takes to task men who are refusing to change diapers. And it's so refreshing because he talks about it in terms of, don't let other men make fun of you for changing your baby's diaper. You need to be able to change diapers. That's a way you should be helping around the house. this is part of your vocation as dads.
Yeah.
So you can hear it even back then that the
Right.
society was like, oh, diaper changing. That's not what men do. Real
Right.
men don't change. And Luther was like, no, real husbands change diapers.
Yeah. And I would make fun of a man who didn't know how to change a diaper. Like, I think that's silly. Like, at least do it so you know how, you know? Like, were you never alone with your kid? I guess that's the real question, not like, because even if you're always working on something so that your wife doesn't have to do any of those things because she's so focused on the kids, was there never a time when you were alone with your baby?
Or that mom was in the shower or something
just
oh my gosh, don't wait.
That. Like, that'd make more sense than waiting. I just waited, I just left the room. And I know there are men that do that, so I don't want to make that's not funny. But don't
do that. Learn how to change things.
I think though that the idea is that men need to learn, young men especially need to learn, what does it mean to be a man? And serving in whatever way that means. It's definitely not a badge of honor to say I'd never changed a diaper. There's other things that you could take as a badge of honor. But I think that by building these young men is how we change the culture, because what we've got is we've got the opposite over the past 100 years or so, where we've just degraded the role of masculinity, degraded the role of men. And when we see what has happened, we've had now where this huge percentage, I saw 50% the other day. I don't know if that's accurate, but it is a number I saw, of young men who are raised in fatherless homes.
Yeah.
And so,
it's huge. It's a huge percentage.
Yeah. And so that all comes off the heels of degrading masculinity. Right. And so then the idea is, if we can restore masculinity, right, then the dads will be more active in their children's lives. And if the dads are more active in their children's lives, then the children will be raised in that environment, and all the negative things that happen, in fatherless homes, we can get rid of. And one of those is I think abortion. And so I think that is how we will make abortion unthinkable. And so that is our first initiative. Our second initiative at Men for Life is, I go to all these pregnancy center banquets and speak. And I've found that, to that third question, how do we get the men in our community to facilitate this? And so when I started creating my talks, I made a point of, how do I inspire these men? And there's two real talking points that are sound bites that I've used that I found to be incredibly effective. The first is, we know that men go to the pregnancy center banquets because, or we know they go to the pregnancy center banquets. And in many cases, they go because their wife brings them, right? And in many cases, that's their role in the pro-life movement, is writing the checks. And that's it, because even there's 54% of men in America identify as pro-life based on a Gallup poll from last year. So where are they, right? Like, they're passive. They're passively pro-life. Only 38% of women identified as pro-life in that same poll. If 54% of men in America are pro-life, we should see way more men leading, right? Yeah. Being more vocal, being more outspoken. And we don't. And so, they've just kind of recognized this as a women's fight, even if we can say it's not a women's issue. And what I remind them is that if we could acknowledge, or if we could admit that we were in a spiritual war, and if we could acknowledge that 90% of the people currently fighting in the pro-life movement, the boots on the ground in the pregnancy centers, like really fighting day to day, are women, then if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity. And then the other thing, when I tried, when I directly call them to service of these young men through the fatherhood programs, is, to just acknowledge that, hey, throughout history, generations of men have looked at the next generation of men and said they have no idea what it means to be a man, right? Like, we are doomed. Like, once we're gone, like, the world is shot, because these guys have no idea what it means to be a man. And the reality today is, with the fatherlessness epidemic, with all of the data we have, with all of the information available to us, at least today, we know why.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we as men are sitting around and complaining about the next generation of men not knowing how to be men, but knowing that it's because they never had a positive male role model, and if we refuse to fill that void, then it's on us, right? Then we are failing in our masculinity. We are failing to provide for them, to lead them, to serve them. Mm-hmm. And that's how we serve all of society. And so what happens is, I'll have a dozen or 24 men come up and say, what can I do? And in the beginning, and this is always the most important thing, because this is the purpose of why I'm saying it, is to tell them, go talk to the pregnancy center director. Yeah. Even if they don't have a fatherhood program, if all of you go, and this has happened many times, if all of you go and talk to her and she knows that you are there, then she can create it. Right.
Right.
And so that's huge. But I recognize that not everyone is in a position to do that, but they still want to be more active. I've had men say, when you were saying this, I was in tears because I recognized that I have not done anything. Yeah. What can I do? And so the second thing that we're working on, and both of these programs roll out on July 1st, is what we call the Men for Life Arena. And the Men for Life Arena is current in its current form is an online membership community with mentorship, bringing in fairly big names in masculinity, in marriage, in finance, in parenting, in pro-life. Because really the idea is to tie biblical masculinity, which is such a hot topic right now because it's so important, to tie biblical masculinity and the obligation to protect the most vulnerable together. Yeah. But then to create an environment where we're having these conversations, where we're teaching pro-life apologetics into where people can have these conversations, and so that they can then turn around when they're not online, right? And when they're not in the pro-life social events, the marches, the banquets, and they can feel confident in speaking boldly for life. And I always call on men and the churches to speak boldly. And I think that now is the time, now is the time, and we can see it. We can see it in that 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. We can see it in that conservative men, 18 to 29, in a poll from June of last year or October of last year, an NBC poll, chose children as the number one indicator of success.
Interesting.
So NBC did this poll. And
I don't know this one.
Do what?
I don't know this poll that you're talking about.
I'll give you another one after this. So I think that all this ties into the work that we're doing at Men for Life. So, but it ties into the country as a whole, and the pregnancy centers, and into all of the pro-life movement, and into so many things. So NBC did a poll, and they separated it by demographic. The demographics being gender, age, and political leaning. Okay. And what they found, and I'm only going through the 18 to 29-year-old age groups because that's what's important in the work that we're doing. So the 18 to 29-year-old age groups, what they found was conservative men. They gave them 13 indicators of success. Okay. Like a list of 13 things, ranging from obviously children, marriage, jobs, home, vehicle, social media influencer was one of the categories. And so 13 indicators of success. Young conservative men chose having children as the number one indicator of success.
That's fascinating.
Yes. Young women, it was 4, conservative. For liberal men, it was 6. And liberal women, it was 12. For liberal women, it was ranked almost dead last, just above social media influencer. And so looking at that, what we know is that men are ready. Like it's not that men want kids, right? It's that men view traditional values, the traditional family, as an indicator of success. And so we can say, well, yeah, but that's just the conservative young men. Cool. There's also data from 2020 to 2024 showing a 7-point shift from the left to the right in 18 to 29-year-old men, right? So men are leaving the left, moving to the right. So that number of young men who believe that children are a number one indicator of success is growing as men leave the left to the right. And that ends in 2024. Now we can look at 2025 through 2026. And we know based on a poll from it's Monday, so this could have been 2 weeks ago, 42% in that same demographic, 42% of young men view religion as important. And in this case, we're talking about Christian religions, right? We know after Charlie Kirk, after Charlie Kirk was murdered, there was this huge shift or surge in the church, right? But now we look at however long later, right? 6 months. I'm not going to.
Yeah, it's about 6 months.
7 months, 8 months, and we can see that now young men view their going to church and their faith. I should say faith instead of religion. Their faith as 42% of them say that that's important. Now that's 13 points up from the year before.
Yeah. Okay? That's a huge shift. 13 points is a huge shift.
Yeah. And so that's a really big deal. And then if we know, and here's where change the culture comes in, right? Because we got 42% of these young men saying that church and religion are important to them. And then we know that if men lead their family to church, their children have a 93% chance of continuing in that faith.
Yeah.
If it's mom that leads the family to church, it's 14%. And that's based on a 2020 poll by Promise Keepers, or 2020 study by Promise Keepers.
And I've seen that same stat for years.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing that decades ago, and it was very similar numbers. Yeah, it's got to be dad who takes the family to church.
Right. And so what I would say is that if you look at all the data, and I'm looking over here because I got this book of just like data points of fatherlessness, right? From the National Fatherhood Initiative.
I'm always adding to my reading list, Sean. So I always want to know what everybody else is reading.
Well, this is easy reading, right? Because it's not actual. Like you're not actually.
It's not literature.
It.
It's statistics.
It's data and research and studies and statistics. But it's from the National Fatherhood Initiative. Knowing that, and knowing what the leadership of men does, knowing that men are going back to the church, knowing that young men believe that children are the number one indicator of success, knowing that 54% of men in America are pro-life. My suggestion would be that if 93% of families whose dad leads them to church will continue in church, then that doesn't just apply to church, right?
Oh,
it applies to how dad leads them. And so if men step up and speak boldly and stand confidently for life, they're leading their families, right? And they're leading their families in a way that their children are also going to speak boldly and stand confidently for life. And so men are the part of the equation that has been overlooked by the pro-life movement for 53 years, while at the same time, the pro-abortion movement has told them to sit down and shut up, right? And so while one side's saying, hey, you need to sit down and shut up, this has nothing to do with you, the other side's saying nothing.
Yeah.
And so they just sit down and shut up, right? And that's why I said earlier, even pro-life men see this as a women's fight where they may be able to acknowledge that it's not a women's issue. And so that is a failure of masculinity, and if I don't know how we're doing on time, but that's something that I say often. I start out my talks by saying that abortion is the product of failed masculinity because I want people to have that in their head as I come back to it over and over again.
Yeah.
But the truth is that so many things are the product of failed masculinity, and it goes all the way back to the garden. Okay. And just to draw out this biblical relationship to original sin and the current state of abortion. So, we're in a spiritual war. Ephesians 6:12 says that we are in a spiritual war, not a war of flesh and blood, but a war against the principalities, the authorities, and the rulers of this dark world. We are in a spiritual war. Ephesians 6:13 tells us exactly what we need to do to prepare for battle in that spiritual war, right? Put on the full armor of God. And to start with putting on the full armor of God, the very first thing that we are told to do is to put on the belt of truth. Because without the truth, nothing else matters, right? And so nothing else matters without the truth, because what we are fighting against is lies, because Satan is the father of lies, John 8:44. And so if we go all the way back to the garden and we look in Genesis 3, what we can see is Satan doing what Satan does to destroy the world, right? Separating the perfect union between God and man and woman. And he gets into Eve's ear and he tells her the lies. And he says, you are not good enough. You are not capable enough. You are not strong enough, just the way God made you. You will never be the woman that you could be unless you do the one thing God told you not to do.
Right.
Unless you eat this fruit, you will never be the woman that you can be. Unless you get rid of this baby, you can never be the woman that you were created to be. And so she eats the fruit because she believes the lie. But what happens next is so much more important. I would suggest it may be the most important verse of the Bible. She turns and gives the fruit to her husband, who is standing right there next to her the entire time, silent, passive, failing in his masculinity, standing there watching and waiting, probably thinking her mouth, her choice, her body, her choice. If she eats this fruit, the entire burden of this decision falls on her. If she has this abortion, the entire burden of this decision falls on her. But we can look at what happens next in the garden and we know that that is not how this works.
Right.
Right? Because God then comes looking. And when he comes looking, who does he come looking for? Well, he comes looking for Adam. And he says, what did you do? And he said, did you eat the fruit? Did you do the one thing I told you not to do? And what does Adam do? He doubles down on his failure of masculinity. And he says, wait a minute, God, you gave me this woman and she gave me this fruit. This is your fault.
Everybody's fault but Adam's.
Yeah, blame everybody. And that's what men do when I call them to action in this. So many men will jump into the comments and say, this cannot be men's fault. This is women's fault. I cannot believe you're giving women a free pass. To which I respond, I'm not giving anyone a free pass. Like, women do not get a free pass for killing their babies. I am very clear on that. But neither do men. And that's what's important. Like, we can blame people all day long, or we can do something about it. And men were called to do something about it. And so Adam failed in all of those masculine qualities, right? He failed to protect his wife. He failed to provide for his wife. He failed to lead his wife. He failed to serve his wife. And instead of leaving a legacy that honors God, he left a legacy of death for eternity. And if there's any question at all that this falls on man and man alone, we can go to Romans 5:12, right? And in Romans 5:12, it says, because of the sin of the first man, all men have sinned. And it continues, and it says, even though not all men's transgressions are as the level of the transgression of Adam, it is very clear from the Old Testament to the New that original sin is the fault of man and not of woman. And I think that that's really important, because that's where we are today in abortion. Men have sat out. Men have allowed this to be a women's fight. And when we allow this to be a women's fight, let's be clear, the abortion industry is not allowing it to be a women's fight. If you're a man who believes in abortion, you are welcome to fight. Like, the abortion industry has made it a fight against women. And men are sitting back and sitting on the sidelines and allowing women to be attacked by abortion and saying, oh, this is a women's fight. Like, that's failing. That is failing in your masculinity. And there's so much more that we can do. And it starts with just speaking out, with just speaking boldly, you know, with just being confident when you're outside of the pro-life social events, when you're outside of the banquets, when you're outside of the marches, when you're outside of the safe spaces, right? Like it's easy and it's safe to stand inside of a banquet, you know, socializing and say, yeah, man, it's just crazy. you know, how they keep killing these babies. You know, Planned Parenthood had 434,500 abortions in 2025, and we closed 50 of them. Like, we're closing their doors and they're doing more.
Yeah.
It's easy to sit in those rooms and say that it's safe, but God does not call us to be safe. He commands us to be courageous in Joshua 1:9, right? And he commands us to be courageous in the face of opposition to everyone. And that is why it's so important that men get off the sidelines and get into the arena to fight.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we have a big call to action coming in September. We're teaming up with Tennessee Right to Life to do a pro-life men's conference in Nashville.
Cool. Yeah.
The response so far has been amazing. And to the point where I'm already looking at, once we finish that one, doing a pro-life men's conference in Dallas.
Yeah. Move it around.
And just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And not like every 12 months, you know, like, let's get men moving. Let's get men mobilized. Let's get men inspired, and let's get men out there. You know, and the big thing is, because men haven't talked about this for so long, there are some times when I will go and speak to men's groups and they just give me blank stares.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did somebody bring you here to talk to us about abortion? This is a women's issue. They don't say that, but they've never had a conversation about it. And so what we're doing is we're tying it into biblical masculinity, because men understand that, right?
Yeah.
They understand that they were designed to protect and to provide, to lead and to serve. And so tying the pro-life message into that. And so we've got great speakers coming to Nashville. Ann Ferens, who was conceived in rape and is now working with Live Action. Victoria Robinson, who is in abortion healing and is from the Nashville area. And, you know, you think, well, you're doing biblical masculinity. You just brought up two women. Their stories tie into biblical masculinity in a way that I cannot.
Yeah.
Like, their call to action for men is crazy.
Yeah.
And they will inspire men in a way that I cannot. You know, Andrew Wood, who is a close friend of mine, I think Peter Demas of Demas Restaurants is going to be speaking. Nick Freitas, who was with the Virginia General Assembly and now has one of the top podcasts in the nation, and is speaking all over the country on biblical masculinity, is going to be our headline speaker. So it's going to be a great event, but it's called Into the Arena. The idea being that it's time for men to get into the arena and fight. And that all comes from, you know, if you look over, I'm going to point this way and assume I'm pointing right. The Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt, you know, his speech where he just points out, like, you get nothing from being on the sidelines. You get nothing from being in the cheap seats. You get nothing as a man from watching the fight, right? Like, the glory belongs to the man who's in the fight, you know, who fails, but gets up and does it again, you know, whose face is marred by blood and sweat and tears. Like, that's what it means to be a man. And so that is our call to action.
Yeah. Awesome. Those conferences, now, are those conferences open only to men?
I'm not going to close them off. You know, and I think that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, because you're the first person to ask it, but it's already been in my mind. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Gruber and the White Rose, and they do some.
We actually just had him speaking here in Fort Wayne.
Okay, so they do some big conferences. They have the one that's coming up is The Last Stand, and I went to Life or Death Con in DC this January, and it's men and women, you know, but his call is to the churches, but from a masculine perspective, you know, and our call is to the men. The churches are just as important, but he's doing great work in that. And so our call is to the men, and those are open to women as well. And so I'm not closing this off. You know, I think that women are ready for men to reclaim their masculinity.
I think we're pretty tired of playing Deborah.
Yeah. I'm not familiar enough with the story of Deborah. I know who you're talking about, but I'm not familiar.
The prophetess Deborah, right? So Israel needed to go to battle, and the person that God was calling to do it didn't want to do it. And so Deborah basically said, like, fine, I'll lead, but there's no glory in this for you because a woman is leading when a man, you could step up and do this and you're not. And I've felt like a Deborah for a long time in the pro-life movement. I mean, it was only 6 years ago that we hired on our first man ever onto the Right to Life team in Northeast Indiana.
Yeah.
It's been very Deborah-y in the pro-life movement for a long time. Yeah.
I'm glad you shared that. I'm gonna go back and read that because that may open up the door for not just allowing women to come, right, but inviting them, to come because I think that's really important. And it's never been up to the women in the pro-life movement to call men to action, right? It's been up to the men to see what's happening and to take action. And so, it's not the pro-life movement's fault that while the abortion side was telling men to sit down and shut up, the pro-life movement wasn't telling men to stand up and fight, right? Because the pro-life movement was super focused on saving moms and babies. Mm-hmm. And that's really important. And so men should have seen that and said, hey, this is important. And for whatever reason, they didn't, but the time is now and it's very clear. Yeah. Like I can tell you from the reaction that I get from, I think I did an event on Saturday and men just wait. Like, I did 2 events last week, and I would say that the total combined amount of time for people, like men waiting to come up and ask what they can do, it was about 90 minutes at the first event of just a line of men wanting to know. And I'm not special. This has nothing to do with me, right? God is working through me and giving his message. And so I'm just trying to honor him. But 90 minutes and then 45 minutes at the second event, people just waiting in line, men saying, nobody's ever said this before. What can we do?
Yeah.
They're waiting. They want to fight. They want to do something. And they've just never been called. Mm-hmm. And so, now is the time. And I think, we can look at the young men, the movement from the lies to the truth, right? The movement from the left to the right, the movement towards the church, the movement, look, Andrew Tate is not somebody who I aspire to be or who I think anybody should really be following, but Andrew Tate is incredibly popular because he was speaking out about men's issues and masculinity when no one else was. Mm-hmm. And young men had a hunger for that. And these young men may not even know what it is they're hungry for, what it is they're missing, because nobody's ever told them, right? They just know that what's happening isn't right. Yeah. They know that they cannot be at the same time the reason that everything in society has failed and too stupid to have caused it. And that's what they're being told. Their young men are being told, you are at the same time too dumb to get anything right, but also intentionally the reason that everything is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a statistic, I don't know, it's been some years ago now though, that said white Christian 50-year-old men had the highest suicide rate in the United States. And that was part of it because they were being blamed for literally everything. And at the same time, being stripped of, it's this catch-22. Yeah, you're ruining everything and you're too stupid. How could you even? It's an incredible place to be in. And I think too, this is maybe part of the reason why your fatherhood initiative is really great, is that the biblical truths, they make sense against reality. Everyday reality makes sense when it's up against the biblical truths. So you present somebody with biblical masculinity, and whether or not they accept Christianity right then, as they go through their life, they're going to keep running into this, oh, this makes sense. Christianity explains this. The Christian worldview makes sense in my reality every day. And I think that's such a powerful witness.
Yes, I agree. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. As we've been talking, Sean, I've had a story running around in my brain and I want to tell it to you, I guess maybe just for your reaction, because, you talk about the devil and how he twists things, right? The lie is this twisted truth. And I think that's maybe what's showing up in this story. So I don't know if you're familiar with our local story in Fort Wayne of our abortionist, Dr. Klopfer, but after he died, they found thousands of fetal remains in his garage in the Chicago area. And it was wild. It was like somebody lit Northeast Indiana on fire. And we were getting phone calls into the office, post-abortive men and women calling, asking, is that my baby? Can I bury them? How do we even know whose babies they are? I mean, it was just crazy. And so these calls, people were telling me their stories, and all day long for weeks, we were fielding these calls. And so I finished work with one day, and I drive to the bank because we needed some cash for an event that we were doing. And I walk into the bank, and the teller says to me, "Oh, how's your day?" And I'm like, do you want to know? Because I'd been bawling my eyes out with people on the phone all day. And he's like, "Yeah, I want to know." And I'm like, "Okay." So I told him what happened. And he started crying on the other side of the counter. And he told me his story. He had had an abortion. It was his girlfriend, and kind of similar to you. He had said, "No, we can do this. We can have this baby." And she was just stuck. She was going to get the abortion no matter what. And so he ended up giving her the $500 because he didn't want her to go find that money somewhere else. He didn't want her. And when he said that, it made so much sense to me that protector instinct was sort of diverting. Like, he couldn't seem to protect his kid no matter how hard he was trying. But you can imagine the trouble that a woman could get herself into, a young woman could get herself into looking for $500 for an abortion. And that was, I think, at that time, the only way he could figure out how to do any sort of protecting in that situation was to give her the money so that she wouldn't get herself into trouble looking for it. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you think of that story? Unfortunately, he didn't, at the time that he told me this, he hadn't gone through any sort of healing. He wasn't connected with a group. He was still in that really, really dark space that he was living in. But I thought it was so interesting that of what he shared, that piece was a piece that he needed to share.
I think that it's, I'm going to try to draw a comparison, and I'll share that same part of my story, but I'll try to draw a comparison between, abuse, right? Because I think it's an abusive thing, or a manipulation tactic. Whatever the conversation between he and her isn't relevant to what I'm trying to say. But think about, like, I'll share mine, right? So months after the abortion, the mother of my child, the mother of the young lady, told me that I should pay half because it was my baby, right? Like, for the first time, and now it's my baby. So I should pay half. And I can tell you that I remember thinking that was the most absurd thing in the entire world. But I can tell you that it's to first say, I'm going to strip your entire masculinity from you by telling you that there's nothing you can do to protect the life of your child. And then to come back and say, you're not a man unless you pay for this. Right?
Yeah.
Is like a double hit to a sense of being, right? If a man were to just completely berate his wife, for whatever, and just make her feel like she is just worthless as a woman, and then turn around and demand sex, right? Because you're not a real woman unless, it's just repeated cycles of abuse. And so whether that conversation with the gentleman you're talking about actually happened or not, the internal feeling of, I'm not a man unless I do this, like, unless I protect my child, and I did not protect my child, therefore I'm not a man. Now, am I also not a man if I don't, as you put it, protect her? I think that it's a very unfortunate thing. And, and I think that it's abusive. I think that it falls into the same category as psychological abuse, right?
Mhm.
That you're tearing someone down and then making them feel like they're even less of a person if they don't do this other thing that doesn't make sense. And so that's my thoughts on that. I think it was crazy. Like I thought it was the most absurd thing in the world that the mother of this young lady would come to me after I fought. I mean, I didn't just fight against the abortion. Like, my dad drove 9 hours to where I was going to school, met with her mother, offered to adopt the baby.
Wow.
Like it was very clear what our position was.
Yeah.
And then to turn around and say, well, you need to pay for half of it. Like, what? Yeah. But I was 19. Like, keep in mind, I was a kid.
Yeah.
And
do you remember how much half was?
And just for transparency's sake, I don't remember like what ended up happening. Like I don't remember. I remember what my thoughts were, but this is a 60-year-old woman telling me that I'm not a man if I don't do this. So I can't remember. I know I didn't have any money, but I don't remember if I gave him any money or not. Like, so if ever there was a conversation where somebody came out and said, well, you paid half of it, and they believed that, I don't have any information to prove that wrong. I just don't remember. There's many things that I don't remember about what happened after the abortion.
And that's not uncommon either, that things come back in layers or in pieces or not at all. They're just gone. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, Sean. I didn't get a chance to say that earlier. I'm really sorry that happened. Why Michael? Why that
Michael
name?
is my father's middle name.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, my dad, even at the worst times, like I said, when I didn't know what to do after I was told that they were going to have an abortion, I called my dad. Right. Mm-hmm. Whenever I would get in during my addiction, I would get in these really bad jams. And because I was doing all the things that you think of when you think of what does a meth addict do, like that's who I was. And so I would make these big mistakes and he would bail me out and I would call my dad, and to the point where he finally, about a month and a half before I ended up going to treatment, just said no more. He set boundaries and he said, and this is the thing that I 100% know that had he not done that, I might be dead. Right. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't have started recovery at the time that I did. But he set boundaries and said, I have to protect myself. I have to protect your mom. I have to protect your siblings from all the things that you've been doing. And so you can't come back here. And we didn't talk for about 6 weeks until the day that I was able to get into treatment. And he came and filled my gas tank. Like I called my dad. And so keep in mind, like I was waiting for the police to come and arrest me. So even though I knew that I could get into treatment that day, I was told not to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so not knowing what to do, even after having not talked to him for 6 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. I knew that I could call him and say, here's the situation. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And he said, you call the manager of the restaurant that I'd been working at that I'd stolen from and tell them what you're doing and tell them where you're going. And if they want to come get you, they'll come get you. And that's what I did. And then he filled my gas tank. And then when I got to the treatment center, and the part of the story I left out is that I then drove in a truck that hadn't had an oil change or maintenance for 5 years through a national forest with no cell phone, just praying that I would make it through the forest. And then I got to the town where the treatment center was, and it started hitting hills, and my truck just started shaking. And I was just praying that God would let me make it to the parking lot. And I made it into the parking lot of the treatment center, and the truck broke down and had to be pushed into a parking spot.
Yeah.
And so I went in and I said, hey, I got to call my dad and tell him I made it. And she said, well, your dad has already called. He's already gotten all the information and he will be here this weekend. And so, that is where I think that I've learned a lot about what it means to be a dad. My kids are young. They haven't made big mistakes yet, but I am 100% confident that no matter how big mistakes they make, no matter how many times I have to set boundaries, my role as a father, just like God's role as a father, just like the prodigal son and his father, is to be there waiting for them with open arms when they're ready to come back.
Yeah.
Because that's the example that I had. And so, that was all very fresh on my mind. The love of my father whenever I was given that opportunity to name my child. So I used his middle name.
Yeah. Does he ever speak in your stuff? Does he come with you? Has he been on the podcast to tell sort of because he lost a grandbaby.
Yeah.
A grandbaby who's named after him.
Yeah.
Has he shared that side of things at all? I'm sort of just curious.
No. So, and we've never talked about it. And so my plan
You've
is
never talked about him sharing, or you've never talked with him about the loss of his grandbaby?
That's right. Never talked about the abortion with him in depth. He's come to many of my talks. He's my number one supporter. He's come with me to stand at the booth for pro-life conferences. But he came with me to the March for Life this year. But we've never actually talked about, how the experience has affected him. So for Father's Day this year, I'm interviewing him. And I'm not going to talk to him about it before that. Yeah. So it's going to be like fresh, right? It's
going to be a little raw, maybe.
Raw. That's what I was looking for. But I can tell you that he has outside of the work that I do, he works for a pro-life, I guess it's an organization. It's a billboard campaign. They put up billboards all over the state of Louisiana. It's him and two other people that are running that. And so this is something that's always been important to his heart. They donated a huge courtyard at our church, prayer courtyard, for babies that have been aborted and mothers and fathers who have lost children to abortion. So this is something that is very that impacted him greatly, right? Mm-hmm. I come from a traditional family where we never talked about anything, mm-hmm. Like we didn't talk about abortion when I was growing up. We didn't talk about drugs when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. My kids have the opposite experience, right? I overshare. So having those tough conversations, those emotional conversations, is not something we've ever done. So I think that, I've just been called by God that this is the year to sit down and do that. And that Father's Day is the time to do it.
Yeah. That'll be interesting. Definitely. Sean, anything else you want to share with listeners before we wrap things up?
Man, I think you gave me an opportunity to get it all out.
Well, and the point was too, to link people to Men for Life, right? Yeah. So I kind of had the idea like, oh, maybe I'll ask him like, what do you say back when someone says abortion's not a men's issue? But you kind of covered that during the course of the whole thing. And I'd rather have them go to the conference and see where, give us and we can link it in the show notes too, but it's called Into the Arena.
Into the Arena.
And where do people go for information about it?
September 12th in Nashville. We're in the process of securing a location this week, and they can go to the Men for Life website. If you go to menforlife.org, there is a link to, I think it just says the arena, which isn't the event, but it'll get you on the email list.
Yeah.
So that as the information starts coming out, you'll be on that email list. And I think, how far are you guys from Nashville?
I don't know. 6 hours.
How long?
I have no idea.
Okay. I know I have a friend, Greg Mayo, who spoke at the Tennessee Right to Life or the March for Life in Nashville this year. And he lives in Indiana. And I know
I know Greg.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I know he drove there. So
yeah. No, it's not horribly far. It's doable.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. All right. Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate the time and I appreciate what you're doing and the call to action that you're giving people. It's fantastic. I love it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to share, and hopefully, every time I speak, it's just to reach one man. If we can reach one man every time, I've got as much time left as God will give me, and He's going to make sure that I reach the men that need to be reached, so that the impact can be had that He wants to have.
Yep. Excellent. This is the Pro-Life Perspective. I'm Abigail Lorenzen. We'll catch you guys next time.